everyone. Welcome to the Parmenius podcast with Bernard Wills. Hello, Bernard.
Hello.
I'm your host, Jordan Shepard, and today we have another in-person guest that we're excited to talk to. We have Aley Waterman. Aley's an adjunct professor here at Grenfell campus of English. She's a fiction writer, first-time novelist, musician, artist, all-around patron of the Humanities, so perfect suited for our discussion today, and also has something of a interest in astrology and all things astrological. Hi, Aley.
Hi, Jordan.
Hello, Aley.
Ready? Hi.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Beautiful day.
Okay, so I guess what we usually do is I do my little opening spiel.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, quite some time ago, I wrote a paper on this very topic. Okay. And well, it concerns the fact that in a field like philosophy of science, astrology is the paradigm case of a so-called pseudoscience. Okay, so that means that if I am theorizing about the boundaries between science and pseudoscience, and astrology is on the wrong side of that line, then I gotta go back, right? I gotta do it over again to make sure that whatever I come up with as a demarcation criterion, astrology is on the wrong side of it, because it's all down to astrology. It's
Right.
like, we really want to get rid of this thing, astrology. Okay, but I take it from our initial conversation that you're here to tell us that astrology is an art, not a science.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's interesting to talk around because the people that I'm close to who are the most sort of, I would say, invested in astrology are probably also the ones who'd be the first to tell you that they don't believe in it as
Believe in
science.
it. Okay, yeah.
Some people I know who are a bit less invested in it would call it a science. So it's
Sure.
it's a strange thing that, I mean, I don't know if it's just, a conversation about bad faith but I don't believe that I don't know if it's something that I believe as a factual sort of evidence-based thing, but I do, there's that line between kind of what manifests from something when you believe in it anyways, or when you start using the language that it offers you. So I want to just be clear about the fact that astrology is something I got into because a very, very close friend of mine, we lived together for many years. Their father was incredibly raised all of his kids on it to the point where you're pointing at a lamp and saying that's a very scorpionic lamp. It's integrated into language entirely. So the friend that I talked to about it, they kind of they employ the language of astrology into everyday conversation constantly, and we talk a lot. I think when we talk for 6 or 7 hours. So that was sort of initially what drew me to it. Wasn't really the magic or maybe the idea that it might be science or that it might offer any answers. It was more so the sense that it does something really interesting. It offers this sort of new way of approaching language that lights upon difference in a more empathetic way than I'd seen before. So that's sort of what drew me to it. But I'm no scholar on it. I'm just a bit obsessed with it.
A bit obsessed with it.
Yeah.
So I mean, look, you can go back to, say, the Renaissance and a Christian astrologer like Marsilio Ficino, right? And what he seems to be interested in, I mean, he does accept the general theory that the stars are causes in some sense, okay? But what seems to interest him far more when it comes to astrological charts is understanding the symbolism of astrology in terms of archetypal conceptions of personality, right? So what is a jovial personality? What is a Saturnine personality, right?
Yeah.
And indeed, he engages in quite a sophisticated discourse about, well, if you're a Saturnine personality, maybe you need to do this diet-wise, or maybe you need more exercise or whatever, right? And so it's a kind of therapeutics of the self based upon a traditional system of archetypes. which, you know, in the mind of somebody like that may correspond in some rough sense to physical reality or may not. Okay. But of course, by the time you get to Carl Jung in the 20th century, it's all about the archetypes, right? Like it's what it really is a kind of system for exploring the psyche.
Yeah.
In terms of certain symbols or in terms of like a language. Right. So do you find that that is helpful in terms of you getting insights into yourself or into your situations? Or
Absolutely. And I think, you know, it's helpful. So like you said, these sort of archetypal structure that occurs and guides the astrology that I'm sort of privy to or that I'm interested in. Yeah, just for listeners, like there are two or maybe more than two, but there's the astrology where you look at your birth chart and then consider the one's personality based on that, and then there's this other very complicated over my head form of astrology where you're sort of mapping yourself against the shifting, ever-changing movement of the world and what's happening in any given moment. So that second version, I think, maybe feels a little more like, do I buy a lotto ticket today? And the first version is more sort of structured around it's not more structured around it, but the language and the archetypes that are provided are pretty central to that understanding. And that whole idea of archetype and language predicates being able to understand the second sort of more complicated form of astrology anyways. But yeah, I mean, I think that what I found was in terms of these notions of like, you know, Aries, Piscean, Scorpionic, Libran, all of these
Taurus here.
Taurusian.
And Leo?
Aries.
Aries. Okay.
Yeah,
oh,
close. Yeah. Our teenager versus fire baby. But yeah, I think that like one thing that I really enjoyed about when I started learning this was that all of these signs have archetypal sort of qualities that are all tethered together in a way that speaks to, I think, our own subconscious notions of association that predate like an understanding of astrology. So there's something really intuitive about these groupings and these archetypes for most people, I think, and all the qualities kind of work together for any given sign. But also, I think my favorite thing about it, in terms of the archetypal ideas associated with it, are that there's no good or bad. There's no like, I mean, there are bad aspects or difficult aspects you can have, but there's no like bad sign or good sign. And I think sometimes pop astrology will say, oh, stay away from this, you know, Aquarii or whatever. But I mean, when you really get into it, it's just these archetypes and how they interact with each other. And they,
And there is, if you are an experienced practitioner, a subtlety to that interaction that, you know, obviously the pop astrology you get in the newspaper is not nearly adequate to that. Right. Complex kind of self-exploration that you engage in terms of like reading yourself through these signs or reading yourself through this system of archetypes and so on. Right.
Totally. And I think that in terms of like the difference, like the purpose of language in bringing forward this empathetic exploration of difference, it's like, I mean, maybe this is kind of a bougie or annoying example, but it's like first when you start trying wine, everything tastes the same. And then if you're like forced, if you know, work in a wine bar or suddenly you win the lottery or whatever, and you're suddenly in this situation where you're trying like 100 different wines that initially all seemed the same. Eventually, like that nuance will develop, your palate develops to the differences that exist therein, the more exposure you have to them. And I think one thing the language of astrology does is it provides a nuanced exposure to difference that isn't isolating. So if you say all these archetypes exist, this person contains these 3 or 4, instead of saying, oh, that's something I don't understand, that's a person that I is not like me, so I don't want to talk to them or I don't want to engage, you can see like, oh, well, this is a very, you know, this person's a Capricorn, so they're an earth sign, so they're not going to get into as an emotional conversation. Maybe they want to ground themselves and really be seen through that. And sometimes that's a problem, because I don't think it's good to say, well, you're this, so you're this way.
Yeah.
But it can, I think, used responsibly, it just creates a lot of space for those understandings through archetypes that brings people closer together, I think. Kind of cheesy, but that's sentimental. But that's why.
Now, I've done some reading on the subject over the years. Like, I have never used it practically.
Yeah.
And I don't really have any particular desire to do so. But like, what? I guess in your case, you took that step from thinking about the thing in general to actually using the thing at an early point in your life.
No, only in the last 5 years.
5 years, okay. Yeah.
Just with.
Is there a catalyst for that?
I mean, honestly, like, all of the pop astrology that I'd read, I'd been like, this is whatever. It's interesting. It's all bullshit. And then, my friend who's really, really into it did my chart. And it's not like a 5-minute thing. It took 2 hours. And it was shockingly illuminating. And
I think a lot of people have had that experience if they have, looked at astrological charts and like, are the stars causing this or the stars not? I don't know, but that's uncannily like me.
Yeah.
Okay. And what that seems to indicate to me is that people have long understood that traits in human beings form clusters. Okay, so like often you find this kind of person has this trait and that trait associated with it, right? So a Saturnine person might be prone to melancholy, say, but also maybe prone to deep wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay. Or love, or passionate love, or something, right? And so there's a sense that, well, things cluster in human beings, and we don't know why. Maybe the astrological charts aren't an explanation of why, but they are a demonstration of the fact.
Yeah, and they're kind of a way to connect, to represent that cluster sort of in language in a way that that kind of is generative, but also has space in it for interpretation and space to kind of work with those qualities. Like, I think now, if you like, when you're asking about sort of the practical approach, like, I don't do that second version of astrology that I brought up earlier, which is like what's happening aspectally right now and how to, but I will say, like, I do take certain, like, a chart is like, there are so many different things you look at. There's your moon, which is your inner self. There's your sun, which is your ego. There's your rising, which is how you're seen. There's your Venus, which is your feminine desire. There's Mars, which is your masculine desire, aggression. All these things are working together. So the 3 of them are about who you are, and then a bunch of them are about how you act. And I think just having, like, whether or not you relate with, where those exist on your own chart and how to explain that, even if you don't, that, which wasn't the case for me, I relate very heavily to most of my chart, but like, if you didn't, that would also tell you how you do feel. So there's a benefit kind of either way. And to use that practically, I think it means saying, like, okay, I am aware that some things are easier for me than other things. Do I spend that energy working on the things that are harder for me because that's something worth developing? Do I lean into the things that are easier? Those are decisions that you can make that you already might know about yourself, but it's helpful to just have it laid out in front of you a bit to say, oh, I can understand that I'm struggling in this area because, if I want to look at it astrologically or through a personality test or something, it just opens things up in terms of.
And I think for certain kinds of practitioners, it's that opening up of consciousness to different possibilities. And look, I'll take as an example somebody who was very much into the second kind of, I think it's called horary astrology or something. I can't quite remember the term. But that's where, it's like, what's the stock market doing? Or, right. But was Queen Elizabeth I. Okay. Also Nancy Reagan too, but and
Right.
also Ronald Reagan apparently.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Interesting.
But okay, Elizabeth I consults astrological charts, not just about her own personality or understanding her jovial Martian or Saturnine nature. She also uses it as a decision-making tool.
Right.
Okay? And the way I tend to interpret that is, again, that may have nothing to do with a particular configuration of the stars in the sky of the Earth at a particular time causing a certain event. But I do think that for a practitioner like that, what she is really seeking, and like I suppose Jung would say this, is like, can I recollect out of myself? Can I bring forth out of myself the grounds on which I need to make this tremendous decision? Right. Do I get married? Do I go to war with Ireland? Do I do this? Right? Because another mysterious thing in life is the timing of things.
Yeah.
Right? And so like in the Greek New Testament, there's this word kairos. Okay, right? It means timing. It's like, and everyone knows, like, you know, if you're like on a date and it's going really well and you're wondering, like, do I kiss the person goodnight? Okay. Like that's like once you do that, no going back, right? Like you've like caused A or B to happen, right? You put yourself forward in a way. And when is the right time to do X, Y, or Z? That's like a purely particular thing like that. Is to most people puzzling. Yeah. Right. Do I propose to my fiance today, or do I put it off? Yeah. Right. Do I make this major life decision today, or do I put it off? Yeah. Right. Do I buy shares in Raytheon today, or you know, because you can get very particular with that.
Totally, right? Yeah, and it can be maddening.
So I guess I would wonder, like, have you ever wondered, or maybe even employed astrological charts to read your own mind on an important life decision?
I think that one way in which maybe I have done that is, like, I'd say the most pop, you know, for listeners coming in being like, oh, why are you talking about astrology to me? The Saturn return is the most sort of popularized thing when it comes to like the, you know, the forward momentum of time versus someone's chart. And that Saturn return is basically from your 27th to your 30th year, and that in those 3 years, basically what they say for everybody, and I can't explain it like astrologically specifically, but what it is it's this time when basically at the beginning of that 3 years, you start to make some decisions that will very significantly impact the rest of your life.
For me, that's what PhD program am I going in?
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And like, you know, everything's followed from that decision that I made.
Yeah.
I didn't consult an astrological chart, but maybe I should have.
Well, right, I mean, you know? And I think that's an age that we're used to kind of seeing as like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, where am I going? And then by the end of it, it's not exactly 3 years, but it's like, I don't know, 1,000 days or something. And so basically by the end of it, if you, it's not prescriptive. It's like, if you followed the path that was intuitive to you at the beginning of those 3 years and you've honored it, then by the end of those 3 years, you should be in a very good place as a result. I mean, that's very vague and broad, and it has to be broad to apply to like every person. But if you have pushed against that or ignored it by the end of those 3 years, then you're fucked, basically. It's like what they say, or you're suddenly like, you have the comeuppance of having to suffer the consequences at that end of that return in a pretty significant way. Yeah. So I was just very aware of that. Like, I'm 31, so mine just ended last year. And I think, you know, if people aren't looking at it astrologically, maybe they're looking at it like, you know, you're a teenager, you decide if you want to go to school or not, whatever. 20s, you're kind of messing around, doing whatever, you're figuring it out. And then the end of your 20s, like, people are more often like on some course. They've figured out what they like to a degree. They know what they don't like, and things become more specific. So that, you know, that's just common. But I think the Saturn return thing, I was very aware of it when I was going through it, and I felt superstitious in a way that I don't with a lot of astrology. But it was honestly it wasn't like, do I buy the blue car or do I jump under the bus or like anything like that. I mean, I can't buy a blue car.
Okay.
Or jump under a bus really,
Yeah.
because there aren't many buses around. But like I don't think I used it like, what do I do today? I think I used it more so like, I feel like there's like the panopticon vibe, like there's like something overseeing me. There's a pressure here, but I'm putting it on myself because I'll be checking back in with it when this ends.
Sure.
It was useful.
Yeah, like, I mean, I've come to, major nodes in my life, and I've sometimes just flipped a coin, right?
Yes.
But even that is an attempt, even flipping a coin is some kind of attempt to communicate with the universe, right?
Totally.
It's like, tell me, coin.
Yeah,
right?
like, why does a coin get to decide?
Okay. Why does, another similar thing would be like tea leaves or, chicken livers or all the various forms of divination, where you're just kind of putting yourself in the hands of the universe and say, tell me something. Yeah. And like the contingency and the arbitrariness of the means is part of that. Right. It's like, flip the coin.
Yeah.
There you go. Right. Because I suppose one thing that indicates is, like, at the most important points of our life, we put ourselves in the hands of something else, right? We don't really put ourselves much in the hands of our faculties of deliberation, because at a certain age, we've learned how limited those are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We've learned that, like, we don't have this kind of predictive power that allows us to, just formulate coherent life paths. Right. We don't have that.
No.
Right? But I mean, Jung, to go back to another example, was fascinated by the I Ching.
Oh yeah,
right?
I love I Ching.
So, and like, that's a corresponding thing. So, like, there are these things like tarot, like, I Ching, like astrological charts, or tea leaves, or flipping a coin, right? Where what you're actually trying to do is access something latent.
Yeah.
Like, I like that. Like, there's some wisdom I have to draw on to make this decision, and I'm not going to access it consciously.
Exactly. And the I Ching's a great example, because there's such a poetic sort of
it's beautiful, I guess.
It's beautifully written, and like, I wish I could read the original, like, obviously in translation, but like that's, I mean, my same friend actually like showed me the I Ching. They have like a beautiful physical copy of it. A lot of people just go online, but
just for our listeners, sorry, because is this like this ancient Han Chinese text? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
It involves sticks, doesn't it? You arrange sticks in various patterns.
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do it, or you throw
them.
Coins,
yeah.
So are we talking about an ancient text, or because I'm
text.
Not sure?
So basically, I'm going to botch this, but based on the accumulation of the sticks or whatever you throw, or like the number, you go to this page and it gives you sort of an aphorism of sorts. And the aphorisms are really poetic, and they're really sort of, they're not direct. They're not like, today you need to cut all your hair and quit your job. They're like, you're aware of the cow who's sweating under the setting sun, or like, something, sure. That kind of thing. Like,
so you're given an image, because it's the image that causes the recollection or the bringing forth of what is, unconscious in the self, but which you, in a certain sense, know is there, and you have to access. So it's like a kind of, Platonic situation, right? Like, the slave boy knows the answer to the geometrical question. Socrates has to draw figures in the sand to bring that out of him, right?
Yeah.
And I understand things like the I Ching very much in that way, right? Like, I'm trying to bring out a kind of latent insight.
Yeah.
It's there in some sense, right? But I'm not going to bring it out by any kind of conscious, rational deliberation. I need like a...
Yeah, it needs to be prompted in some way.
So I need a spark. I need a prompt. And you'll appreciate this, Jordan, but composer Cage used the I Ching to make musical compositions.
Wow.
And again, it was like, like, I can sit down and, write out all the notes a traditional Western composer has, right? But, he's fascinated by the possibility that, no, I can bring forth a completely different kind of order. I can form a completely different kind of aesthetic, using the appearance of randomness or the appearance of chance as you say, who said a prompt? You said a prompt.
You said prompt. I think I said spark.
Spark.
Yeah.
Spark. So I need that spark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, I guess to get to the nub of the matter, this is like when Jung looked to Indian philosophy, say, or when he looked to Buddhism, or when he looked to Hinduism, right? He was trying to break through a certain kind of, mask that, a kind of mask of like conscious, discursive, willed thinking that had become, overemphasized in the culture of like 20th century Europe, right?
And now it's being incredibly overemphasized.
And now it's even more overemphasized,
literature.
right?
Yeah.
And what about wisdom that's spontaneous? He says. What about insight that's spontaneous? Like, we need techniques. I mean, I think he thought talk therapy could also be precisely this kind of technique, right?
Absolutely.
Where it's not like, let's just work this thing out. Let me prompt you. Let me prompt you. Let me prompt you, and you will come to certain realizations yourself.
Yeah, like dream analysis and these
dream analysis.
Like, I think that like what you're saying is, yeah, it's very true, especially with the I Ching in relation to like what the text says is one thing, but whatever importance you tether to that is telling you about the thing that you're surfacing subconsciously. Like whatever the symbolism means to you, there's no ontological truth to what the symbolism is like universally, but what it brings out for you is very telling, and it might not be prompted without that sort of image. And I mean, like, to go back to the very first thing we were talking about like the nature of astrology as a science. I mean, I'm a bit like we're in a previous conversation. Yeah. I'm not bent on understanding all of anything. I've done like lectures on literally being a dilettante and like why and what that means.
That's anyone's working career here at Grenfell is kind of being a dilettante.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's like, someone's got to teach this first year, whatever.
Yeah.
Guess it's you, Bernie, or I guess it's you, Aley.
Yeah.
What is a dilettante, guys?
A dabbler.
A dabbler.
Oh,
a flaneur.
Aren't we all dabblers?
Yeah, flaneur, like it's an old word, but
no, but like I found, like just like my experience with something like lecturing, right?
Yeah.
I find that I'm prompted to say astounding things by the fact that, like, okay, take this over here. I'll flip through this. Bernie, lecture on Paradise Lost.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know anything about Paradise Lost. Oh God, right?
Yeah.
And I've had the experience where, okay, I read this damn thing. I don't know what the hell I'm going to say. But you get up there and the poem prompts you to things.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And I have a little technique that it's like I read the first couple lines and I'm like, oh, wow, this is suddenly saying things to me, right?
Yeah.
And in that setting, it works to unlock what the poetry has been doing to you unconsciously all along.
Exactly.
Right?
You allow, I mean, if you like, I don't mean this literally, but like allowing the gods to speak through you, as some would say the poet is doing when they're writing. I mean, I think, yeah, like that is very powerful. And, the human will is incredibly, I think, I wouldn't say it's undervalued, but maybe underestimated. Like going back to the very beginning of the conversation, when people are like, is this, how could you call it a science if it's not proven? I was listening to a podcast the other day about how there's a certain, I think in China, that, like in certain cultural corners, if you have like an elderly family member, you like the family will be told if they're terminally ill, but the patient won't necessarily be told. It's kind of the inverse of like what we see in the Western world a lot. But basically the reason for that, and I mean, it was one podcast I was listening to, I haven't done a lot of research on it, but the reason for that was because if someone thinks they're dying, they're gonna die, and if someone doesn't think they're dying, they'll still die. But there's been proof,
not as soon, maybe.
yeah like there's been proof that like not leaning into that and the willfulness of like not being aware of that has provided massive amounts of longevity for people, which is kind of gives us agency to the sort of subconscious in a way where it's like, are we leaning into the things that will lift us up or tear us down or our demise. I think that, you know, the mind and the body are so connected. Like when I'm nervous, I can't eat. Like, you know, that's a thing. Like there's various things like that. There's no way to disconnect those two things. So I think in light of that, like astrology, it's like, no, you might not be able to prove that like the celestial bodies in the sky are affecting our actions and our movements, but I think the will to kind of abide by it or understand it in some way can lead you down a very different path than you would have otherwise, and that's very valuable.
And I think, you know, from what I know of, you know, astrology and classical antiquity, people didn't draw a sharp distinction between those things. There's a generalized understanding that, well, okay, so like, and here's something that expresses that generalized understanding. Okay, there is a celestial body that affects, well, there's two celestial bodies that affect things on Earth, right? The moon and the sun. And the moon does weird things to people.
Makes people, you can feel it when there's a full moon happening.
Everyone begins from the assumption that, well, there are connections, intrinsic connections between the heavens, the celestial realm, and the earthly realm, right? And so it's perfectly fine for people, or was perfectly fine for people to draw the inference, well, surely that includes the stars too, okay? And maybe the light from the stars or the ether or whatever it is that the stars emit filters down through our atmosphere into terrestrial realms, right? Maybe it has an influence there, okay? At the same time, kind of exactly as you said, I don't think people were over concerned with rationalizing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So the example if I'm recalling this correctly, the classic textbook for astrology is the Tetrabiblos by Ptolemy, the ancient astronomer. Right. And he says, you know, there's some problems here, precession of the equinoxes, and he makes some suggestions for maybe solving those problems, but you don't get the sense it really bothers him much.
Yeah.
Right. That, okay, like the precession of the equinoxes is that problem where the signs of the zodiac don't quite line up.
Yeah, they're gonna kind of tilt
because of leap years and things. And like, how do you take account of that in astrology? And he makes some suggestions. You might do this, you might do that. But he's not having an existential freak out over the precession of the equinoxes.
No,
right? Because at the same time, I think the ancient practitioner understands that he's also using it for something else. Maybe a physical theory. It may not be a physical theory, but it's important.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think that faith is useful outside of rationale, outside of like the proven. I mean, you know, religion, like this. I got into astrology, it felt more like religion to me than you know, me learning a fact, because I was like, I believe in what this does.
And in antiquity, that was the case, because part of the art and practice of the astrologer was to cultivate a certain awe at the beauty and order of the celestial, right? And so to feel an intense connection, even with those highest and most distant, right, objects, right?
Absolutely,
and so, there's a kind of contemplative awe. There's a giving of yourself over to the cosmic order in some sense. But of course, the great question was back then, and this became a very serious question in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. What's the relation of astrology to free will? Okay, because certain people took a very deterministic view, right? And so, for instance, St. Augustine on the City of God, which is over there on the shelf, he attacks astrology on the grounds of determinism. Right. Now, in the Renaissance, other people said, well, actually, what astrology does is mesh in a certain way with your will. Right.
Really,
so it's not like deterministic.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
What were you saying, Aley?
No, it's just cute that they were like, we're no longer in this social. I'm like, I wish the political difficulties of the moment were people saying that astrology is too deterministic and
an incredible
kind of
irony.
sweet, but I mean, I think that it's a lot like therapy. What if you have a bad therapist? What if you have a bad astrologer? What does it mean to be a bad one? I think it means enforcing this idea that there's a very specific thing you should and shouldn't do.
And there's no choice, and
Yeah.
your fate is fixed, and
Yeah, or you are like this specific type of person that it's never going to change. Like a lot of, I won't get into the details, but in astrology, one thing, like everyone has at least one very difficult aspect. There's something in a house, like there's a sign in a house that it doesn't work out, like they don't work well together, so it's a difficulty. But oftentimes that difficulty is actually the thing that people end up devoting their lives to, because it's the hardest thing to them. It's the thing they don't understand. Like mine is very much relational. Like my most difficult aspect is relational. So I've been obsessed with clarity and communication to mitigate that, like for years, because I used to be very passive aggressive and like non-responsive. So like that is a response to the difficulty.
Sure.
So that's actually doing the opposite of saying like, oh well, you're this way. Like you have Mars in Cancer in the 12th house. You're very passive aggressive, and there's
so can I just say something? That it's like almost, instead of it being an essential, this is what the person is, this is the personality, it's like representing the difficulties that you find in a symbol yourself. So you say like communication is this difficulty I have, which is not a clear, even a rational category. What is it that about communication that's difficult? No, it's this symbolic thing that you can see. You said earlier, like understanding through archetypes. You can see through that symbol something that is calling you to develop or something.
Exactly. Like I fundamentally, my biggest problem has always been like I don't really, like there's something, or at least more so in the past, like I haven't been able to understand other people. Like I've just been, and you can't understand all of another person, but that made me obsessed with trying to. And not everyone, but like, writing a novel is like getting into that space of
you're a novelist, so you're assumed to be a shrewd reader of character.
I'm obsessed with reading character and fictionally, and maybe like in real life as well. But that difficulty, like everybody has something like that in their chart. But if you were sort of I would say a bad astrologer, not to put like value judgment, but like if you were an astrologer that was misguiding someone, that person would have said to me, well, you really like you're bad with communication, like you can't really do that, so like stay away from it, like go get a job where you're working in an office by yourself. Just don't try to do that, but what just like a therapist could say, like, oh well, you should go like shoot that person, or like that's an extreme example, but it's like everything that's wrong with you, it's fine, like it's no problem, just keep doing what you're doing, like everyone else is wrong or something. Like that's really dangerous, and some therapists kind of do that. They can be too enabling. So it's more so this umbrella of like, it's like reader response. It's like what happens when
like reader response. That's the most beautiful example, because I mean, when I hear you talk about the zodiac, this is how, say, a person regards a sacred text, right? As, like Northrop Frye's book on the Bible, like it's this repository of symbols, and people use these symbols and they mix and they match them and they understand things, right? And it's very much about hermeneutic interaction.
Go on. What do you
mean? I mean, like astrology is a practice of reading, and you're reading the text, and you're reading yourself at the same time. And you're reading a different text in a certain sense than I might be, precisely because you're engaged in self-interpretation, exactly at the same time as you're engaged in interpretation of the words.
Yes.
Right? And there was Renaissance astrologer whose texts, as far as I know, are inaccessible, right? Nicholas Cardanus.
Okay.
And what he was about, I mean, he was an important astrologer, but he was very concerned about this problem of determinism, right? Like, do the astrological charts just impose themselves on you, right? And he said, no, it's actually probabilistic interaction. Right? Like, I'm interacting in a certain way with the signs, and the signs are pushing and pulling in certain directions, and I'm pushing and pulling against them, or I'm going with them. But what results is a cooperation.
Yeah.
of the individual
Mhm.
with the chart or the celestial influence or the, you know, the whatever planetary thing is in the ascendant, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like I think most modern practitioners I've talked to would agree that yeah, that's the right approach to it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so too. I mean, I think like yeah, it's not, it shouldn't be taken as prescriptive, and it should be, like you said, be this, if, or I don't even want to say should, but like when this push and pull exists, you can decide, just like the free will is immense there. You can decide
Mhm,
what you want to work on or where you want to take it. Like,
Sure.
and it's like you said, I think in an earlier conversation, like we already kind of know everything about
Yes,
ourselves.
we do. We
So
do, right?
it's not like, but I will say that, like, you know, maybe unlike tarot or unlike the I Ching, which kind of can't do this, like I've on purpose read people the wrong chart for them just to see what would happen, and they've been like, oh, I just don't relate to this at all.
Oh, okay.
And then just
Yeah,
to see what would happen. And then I've had the biggest skeptics I know. I've read their charts and they've been like, whoa, what the hell? Like, why? So I don't know why that's true, because I don't know why that happens so often, and I don't know why, you know, when I fake, you know, do a fake out and do a different one,
it doesn't, you get that reaction.
Because it's not always the power of suggestion, but I don't, you know, that doesn't mean it's factual, but there is something there that I just find interesting.
There's an uncanniness to the symbols, and whoever created the symbols seems to have had pretty shrewd insights into, you know, human beings.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know, do astrologers still use the old personality types like jovial and saturnine? And
I mean, maybe in conversation, but not like if you were to, like, a birth chart has no words in it.
Okay.
There's no, it's all symbols. It's a big circle, and then there's like all these lines and symbols and trines and sort of aspects, and it's the colors. So there's nothing written, like, you know, real astrologers now, they just have internalized so heavily
the symbols
and how they interact, that they're not, if they, you know, most people find it online because, like, it's, you can't really calculate it.
And like most people focus on signs, not planets, as far as I can tell. But
well, so there's, if you pictured like a rotating gear in the sky that's divided in, you know, 12 pieces of a pie, or like it's a pie, it's kind of doing this and it's moving around like this. There are 12 houses and there are 12 signs. So I won't get too far into this because it's hard to really think about without a visual, but you're mapping two, like, basically circles onto each other when you look at a birth chart. You've got the houses, which there are 12 houses, but each of them are guided by a sign. So if, you know, the first house is in Aries, but it's based on where you were born and, you know, what time. If Aries is like tilted over here, or if it's completely upside down to that initial point, and you have something else in that house, like, but so they use the planets and then they use the houses, and like there's kind of three things operating at once in a birth chart. And that's that's how it's like when people are like, oh, I'm a Leo, so I'm you know, I'm a romantic person or whatever. That's like saying, like we're talking about, like, if someone reads one line from like Plato and then they're like, so this is what this guy was up to.
So it's a complicated act of reading. It involves the charts, but it also involves your response to the charts at the same time in this complex interacting way, right? But here's where the crap hits the fan, as it were, in terms of our interest in things like this. If I were to say to you, you know what, Aley, let's have a course in humanities on astrology. I'm pretty sure I get blowback. Probably. Yeah. Right? There's a sense that, this might be like a personal hobby or something, but it's not a real subject because we don't teach it in a university.
I know, and then you have like Rome, and you have the classics where you learn about the humors for like 3 weeks.
Okay, no, you learn about the humors. You learn, and you read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and you know that, well, Chaucer was an astrologer, and you know the Canterbury Tales begins in Aries, and that's a reason, and right. So it's assumed in all kinds of cultural discourse, but the thought of making it itself an object of cultural discourse
Mhm.
rather than an aid to reading literature,
Mhm.
right? Or a thing for scientists to bat around who want to demarcate science from pseudoscience, right? Would you teach such a course?
Would I teach?
Would
I mean,
that
I
get
wouldn't
too
be
personal?
qualified.
No,
but,
I mean,
Get too like
because is it a practice?
am
or
I
is it
teaching
a-
people how to do it, or am I teaching them about what it is?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question.
Because
Right.
I would,
Because like we have courses here on how to run a business,
yeah.
right? And I don't know. I've never taken those courses. I don't know right? If they're better than astrology or not better. I assume they are, right? So I can teach you how to run a business. I can teach you how to fix teeth. I can teach you
meditation.
nursing.
There's been courses on
Courses
meditation.
on
Oh, yeah,
meditation.
There at Grenfell.
So
Wow.
why not a
Similar.
course on astrology?
Why not a course on
Yeah.
astrology? There absolutely should be. I mean, I don't know. It would sell out in 5 seconds.
I
If
know
that's-
it
if
would.
that's a
I know it
problem.
would. I
Like
could-
everybody wants to do
and-
that.
But it
Like-
would open all these pedagogical questions
Sure.
you're saying. It would be like we talked about last week about like indigenous,
Yeah.
like traditional knowledge in
Yeah.
humanities. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's this whole kind of secularization hypothesis that societies, and you've written on this recently,
Mhm.
society, or you reshared one of your articles on this, society is getting more and more and
Yeah.
more and more and less and less and more and more and more secular, less and less and less religious.
Yeah.
So therefore we're moving away from
Which is
these
not true.
archaic,
I think
precise.
that's a completely false reading of
Yeah,
what's going on.
that's an impoverished notion of the symbolic.
The religious
tradition.
dimension in human society and experience is changing profoundly. In a certain way, like
Absolutely.
changing away from traditional confessional churches to more personalized things.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
But no, continue, Jordan.
Oh yeah, it's just
Yeah.
the nature of that same secular influence on the question of astrology, isn't it? Because
Mhm.
you'd have to
Mhm.
you'd have to be half in, half out for the kind of students who are complete skeptics with the nature of
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
basic nature of a symbol. Like, and that's
Yeah.
kind of an extraordinary
Yeah.
challenge.
And
Yeah.
that's why, just to interject, I think an astrology, in some contexts, an astrology class could be as good as a poetry class
Absolutely.
because it's kind of visual poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also, I think a lot of these symbols I think understanding archetype and how it could be, if we're talking about the usefulness of taxonomy in narrative is
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
beneficial to people, like understanding symbolism and how you can take it from a text that you read and sort of employ it in your daily language and life is
Mhm.
something that anyone could benefit from. So I think if I taught that, I mean, I'm certainly underqualified to teach it, but like if I did teach it, it would have to be like, here are what these symbols are.
Mhm.
Here's what they represent. Here's how they overlap, and here's how you
Mhm.
would here's how you would read a birth chart. But I don't think
Mhm.
I'd be able to say like, this is real, or this is
Yeah.
like going
Yeah.
to tell you who another person is. Like,
Yeah.
I think it would need that distance, that critical distance. But I don't understand why it's not a thing, because it's
But
very-
like,
it's
I
very
mean, I
enjoyable.
could do it, say, under the rubric of here's this history of this idea.
Exactly.
I think I could get away with that. I don't think
Yeah.
anyone would be too upset if I did that.
No one's checking in if you spend 2 weeks of the term
Yeah.
teaching them how to do a
But
birth
of
chart.
course, the presumed framing of that is that I'm just examining this as an object. This is not a participatory thing. We're not going to be astrologers. We're not going to participate in astrological practice. We're just going to study it in text as a historical phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right. And I, for instance, recognize, and just to go back to what we were talking about last week, that an indigenous student, for instance, doesn't necessarily have that same relationship, that same distance, right? That same purported objectivity, where they say, well, I'm just going to tell you what the history of Navajo ideas are. And I'm
Yeah.
just going to do that descriptively. Here's what it is. So it's a bit of neutral information out there. Do whatever you want with it, right?
Yeah.
I think, I've sometimes mused with the thought that, something like astrology could be used precisely as a way to understand a more participatory process of learning.
Yeah.
Like, can we introduce learning by doing in the humanities?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, but like we can't do this in the sciences. There's no way they'll know
No,
Aley
no.
that they'll ever let you talk to the astronomy students.
No, I don't even really
Right?
want to
Because
talk to you.
that demarcation is there and it's firm,
Yeah,
and that's how they want it, and that's up to them.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, and that's fine.
And that's fine. I have no objection to that whatsoever. But over here, it's assumed that we're a little more adventurous.
Yeah, it's like I love artwork, but I don't need to talk to the people who made the paints.
No, you
You know.
don't.
It's kind of like, I think that, yeah, we're more adventurous over here, and I think that, like, the other beautiful thing about doing charts, like about astrology, is like people love like getting attention.
They
And
do.
it's
They
a
do.
very like
Yeah. And talk therapy is the same thing. Wow, here's this person listening to me, bitch and moan about it. Right? It's like,
I know,
wow,
then
and they're
it's like
interested.
Tony
Right?
Soprano, and then they're like, oh, I think I'm in love with my therapist.
Everyone's in love with their therapist, apparently.
Right,
It's called-
yeah.
What's that called? Transference?
Transference,
Yeah,
yeah.
transference.
I know,
Yeah.
it's unfortunate. It's misguided, but I understand. But yeah, like I think that, young people are right now really into
Mhm.
pop astrology, in
Sure.
part because, like, that's a bit separate from doing someone's
Yeah.
astrology, but you start to do it, and this is sort of the danger of it too. But then people
Yeah.
are like, oh, you know me, and it's like, I don't know you. I'm
Yeah.
just, yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the symbolism of your chart.
Mhm.
But that feeling, I think, even if it's slightly misguided in certain instances, makes people feel really good.
Mhm.
People want to feel seen, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and to be seen in a way where you're relating to something that you can then show the world or show the people in your life
Yeah.
as a way of approaching you that's incredibly nuanced, and not just like family systems theory in therapy.
Yeah.
The sense that like families all have these archetypes and these roles, and
Sure.
they relate to
Yeah.
each other in relation to those roles.
And families are pretty strict about policing those roles sometimes.
Oh,
It's like in my family, I'm the smart kid, right? I
Right.
mean, like I'm the kid who makes an A on his test, and if I don't make an A on my test, that's an issue.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
It's not an issue for my sister, right?
No,
Right?
and
Yeah.
these are the things that we sort of like, our identities are informed by this like formative experience of the archetypes that we're sort of given in relation to
Mhm.
others.
Mhm.
So like, it took me a really long time in my family. Like my family's amazing, and they've always like been very sweet to me about this, but they always thought I was like really spaced out. So like they thought I was really ditzy. I am spaced out a lot of the time.
Mhm.
But then they're like, why is she, she keeps doing this school, like, and they were tethered to this idea. And then, I became more able to like converse about the things I care about, et cetera, et cetera. And now when they say that, it's sort of lost because it doesn't, but if something happens where I do something ditzy, they love it, because not because they want to tear me down, but because
you're fulfilling the role.
Yeah.
Is there family astrology?
Well, yeah, you can do any. I mean, I looked at Jordan's astrology once in relation to like his chart with his brother's chart.
Mhm.
Family astrology just means like it's relational astrology. So you're just, once you can do someone's chart, you can map both charts together in two different types of ways and see where everything sits in relation to.
So you could set up a portrait of Jordan, Scott, and your mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and you could so it's kind of like a composite portrait.
Yeah.
Right. What's going to emerge when I overlap these sets of charts? Right?
Yes. Yeah. And doing it with I don't think it'd be possible to do 4 on top of each other. I think you'd have to do each one in relation to the next.
To the next.
And then
so it would be
infer-
serial, not. You'll be sequential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you can infer based on that, like how the whole thing operates.
My sense of that was that it just illuminates kind of the nature of your relationships so interestingly, like to the point where, like, I don't know, we keep getting back to this, but there's like this symbolic like lack these days. So just to see that symbolism illuminated can be so like, you bring your own experience to that, and then it's like this incredible illumination of what you think you already understand about yourself. And someone is through like a folk psychological lens or whatever you want to call it, is able to like show you something in yourself. I mean, it's just incredible, right?
It can be very healing for people, I think. Like even if they don't like believe it's true, just to have a conversation of like, oh, maybe someone and their like sister never got along or something, and it's just painful. Like,
and you don't know why. How come we never got along?
yeah, and it's
right?
just
Why did we clash
painful,
like this? And like astrology is traditionally being the quote unquote science that has dealt with those contingencies and particularities of experience that escape general laws.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's I think that being able to put language, just even generally, to these forms of like these things that are painful, that are so hard to look at directly because they're so close to you. I mean, sometimes the closest things to us are the ones that we can't really like get far enough away from to like look at objectively. It's like the the David Fosterwell's water fish thing, and it's like the fish is like, what's water? Like, I don't know what water is because I'm in water.
Yeah.
Having that delineated and having it discussed in relation, I think can really, really help people like understand that difference is necessary, but two people like you said, the symbolism, like the sort of folk approach to that symbolism, it's like the ways in which you could be compatible with someone you care about and the ways in which you can be incompatible are not necessarily about who's wrong or right. They're just completely about like what you're mapping on top of what and how that manifests relationally. So I find it can be incredibly healing. I mean, I'd say the quote unquote wrong way to use astrology, but a lot of people I know do this. So they'll go on a date with someone, look at their chart and say, no way.
No way.
And then they'll walk away. And
well, you could say that's just lazy reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or I mean, that's sort of a superstitious thing. And like, and it's just kind of lazy, but it's fun.
Jordan, do you have anything to add? How are we for time, by the way?
We're at about an hour, actually. So always the organic.
Internal clock.
Yeah. Well, this has been phenomenal. I would just say thanks for coming on, Aley. And this has just been such an interesting conversation and so many different directions for it to go. So I was really interested to have the dialogue, and thank you guys for taking part.
Yeah, man, it was really fun. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Anything else?
No, I'm good.
Thanks, everybody. You've been listening to the Parmenius podcast with Bernard Wills.